So, Witcher 4 and its trailer, eh? I mean, when that trailer dropped, the discussions around the game, they were quite heated, weren't they? Many players decided to go crazy about Ciri's looks, calling the game woke and claiming that CDPR uglified her like the big companies apparently do these days, while they are completely ignoring the fact that every model in any trailer always looked quite different from the actual models that we would see in game, right? I mean, even Witcher 3, the trailer, Geralt looks significantly older and more rugged than he would turn up in the game itself. In fact, he would turn up so much less Witcher-like in the game that I had to uglify him myself back in the day with the help of some mods. And, I mean, I get it, so I want to make one thing clear up front. I honestly don't really care much about the whole culture war stuff. For me, it is very simple. If a game looks ass, I do not buy it. If millions of people do the same, these issues solve themselves. What we saw perfectly fine with Concord, Skull and Bones, or Suicide Squad. But what I want to talk about today is something else. It is the necessary ham-fisted writing and possible deflation of the world building that needs to happen to make the things that we see in the trailer even possible, and why I believe that The Witcher 4 might become CD Projekt's Diablo 4. It's Assassin's Creed Odyssey, it's Warcraft 3 Reforged, it's Mass Effect Andromeda. Simply the one game that after their previous major fuck-up with Cyberpunk a few years ago, finally turns the still, somehow favorable reputation among the fans of the series into distrust and maybe even anger. And why is that? Well, that's what this video is about. So, grab a drink, have a seat, and let's talk about The Witcher 4 and writing. Of course, to discuss the trailer, we first need to find out what is there in the trailer that causes the emotional distress. Besides the heavy usage of lazy nostalgia bait, what is, at least for me, always a big glowing red flag everywhere I see it, the answer is quite simple. It's three things in fact. It is, first and foremost, it is a sequel to Witcher 3, and we play Ciri. Second, Ciri is a witcher, including their armor, the tools, the drinking of the highly poisonous witcher potions, and of course the cat eyes. Third, and Ciri is barely using her magic powers that we know from Witcher 3. And when she does use magic, it is very different from what we're used to, and way, way weaker. And these 3 points might not sound so dramatic, but in Sapkowski's and CDPR's world of The Witcher, they have incredibly high implications. Because, for one, there is no canon, is there? To address the first point, we need to make clear that the Witcher games do not have a clear canon they could build a story for a fourth game upon. But instead it has many endings and features major decisions across all 3 games that shape our world quite significantly over the course of the trilogy. We do little decisions, right? For example, who we romance, like the choice between an obnoxious, rude, and arrogant wench or Triss Merigold. Or we can just do them both, or we can just do basically everyone we come across that has a nice pair of nature's stress balls hanging from their torso, because why not, right?
This is our chance to change history. How could I run away from that?
To reveal.
What is it? Why do you gaze at me so?
I was just thinking.
You think Unbelievable. You think I would... In these circumstances? The fate of the world is in the balance, and you're thinking about sex?
Oh, what the hell. Strip.
I mean, Geralt even collected little cards in the first game to remember his romantic and less romantic adventures. Then in Witcher 2, we basically decide how the Scoia'tael, the elves and dwarves in the universe, fare in their war against kind of everyone else in the northern kingdoms. Big story part, so big in fact that the game splits in 2 halves in the middle of it, depending on what decisions we make before that in Act 1. So that is actually a really big thing. Even as Scoia'tael were kind of just ignored in Witcher 3, but it's a whole different story. Then in Witcher 3, we, of course, where the game is all about Ciri and the Wild Hunt, hence the title of the game, and we basically decide the fate of Ciri, right? Like, if she becomes a Witcher, that is something that can happen. Though she becomes more a Witcher on more the professional level, like what she's doing, than the biological level, right? She does not become an actual Witcher. Or Ciri can also kinda die if Geralt behaves like a prick. Or she can become the literal Empress of Nilfgaard if we decide to hand her over to Emhyr in Witcher 3. But that is by far not all. Our decisions literally influence the fate of all the geopolitics of this world, and if Nilfgaard can conquer more of the northern countries, or we influence if Temeria becomes independent again, or if Redania goes kind of crazy and wins and then dropkicks both nations back into their place, and instead goes full Inquisition mode and continues the extermination of all magic and sorcery that they can get their hands on, right? So the question that leaves us with is, how are they going to connect this sequel to anything that can happen in The Witcher 3 and of course also Witcher 2, especially considering that Witcher 3 is clearly made to be an ending to a story and most of the characters in it, including Geralt, but of course also for characters like Dandelion and Sultan, Vesemir and our home Kaer Morhen, for many of the sorcerers we meet along the way, Lambert and Erskil, for the Djinn's curse that forcefully connected Geralt and Yennefer's fates since the very first book. It is an ending for many of the most active figures of the countries that we meet, like Dijkstra or Radovid, and of course also for the prophecy surrounding the White Frost and the Child of Destiny. So in many regards it was also an ending, an epilogue for this major part of Ciri's life. And I only see 3 ways, basically, how they could do that. Way number 1, they just shit on all of our decisions and establish a clear canon, what would, as a result, undermine the complete role-playing aspect of the previous 3 games and the trust in the decisions that we make in consecutive games, including Witcher 4, right? If they do not respect our decisions, then what do they mean for us as players, right? And despite of my disdain for this route, I think this would probably be the cleanest and easiest start for them to have for a new trilogy with Ciri as the main character, right? They just draw the line, we just say that's how it is, everything else is like some what-if story that players can play if they want in the previous games, and that's how it is going forward, right? It isn't great, but that is how I personally expect what they will probably need to do. Because the other 2 ways are, number 2, they try to have origin stories, where they somehow make Ciri and all the decisions that we made before that end up in the same place, aka with a Witcher-Ciri. And considering the impact and the quality of the Cyberpunk origin stories, I do not trust them to be able to connect all possible, at least big endings and big decisions, somehow be able to funnel that into this story's like core starting point. I don't see this happening. And the third way they could do it is I call it the time skip method, where they pretend that a bunch of years went by, and no matter of our decisions, everything developed off screen in a way that writers want and need to lay the fundament of the game's story and world. That is kind of the way that number 1, just establishing a clear canon, would also work, but more complicated and just not that clear, in my opinion, as an approach, right? You're still just shitting on the decisions of the players, but you're still like, it feels like a less honest method of just saying, hey, that is the clear canon, right? So I honestly don't expect that to happen either. But as a conclusion, at least for me personally, all of these options are shit, right? And to me, at least, it becomes even more worrying when I hear statements from the executive producer that they decided on Ciri as a protagonist just 9 years ago. And now you might wonder, why is that bad? 9 years sounds like a lot of time to develop a story, right? Technically, yes. But with the fact in mind that I will make many people feel very old now, which game released 9 years ago? Exactly, the Witcher 3 main game. What that means is that a very important core decision to make a sequel with Ciri as the main protagonist, that decision was made after the third game came out. Meaning that they indeed could not set up shit for this game. And probably also means that they originally did not plan to make a fourth game in the first place. Right? That's why I'm saying that Witcher 3 kind of feels like an ending to a journey. So the problem is now that every kind of setup and mental gymnastics to make Ciri end up in that role and that state has to happen in the fourth game, with no previous foreshadowing or groundwork made previously, but instead with a basis of plenty of non-linear decisions and world states that they somehow have to work with, right? And that is a terrible place to start working from as a writer, right? Even if we consider that the consistency and continuation between the first 3 games is sometimes already a little bit questionable at best. But the lack of canon is just one of the issues, and as I said, I think one of the issues that they could probably solve the easiest way by just establishing a clear canon. But now we come to the next problem, and that is, why the fuck does Ciri become a Witcher in the first place, and what speaks in favor of it, and more importantly, what speaks against it? Well, the only way to justify that decision that I could come up with is this. Something that only readers of the books know is that Ciri gets basically hunted by everyone due to her elder blood, which enables her crazy-ass half-god magical powers, right? Like Emhyr wants her, the Emperor of Nilfgaard. He wants her because, well, she is his daughter, because she's powerful, and she is the heir of the throne of Sintra and Nilfgaard, right? So she is a really good heir for him to save this conquered ground for the nation and then lead them into a future. That's also why he asks us as Geralt to bring Ciri to him in Witcher 3. What is, I think, a decision that most people probably will not make, but it is an option that you have, and then Ciri ends up, in fact, as the Empress of Nilfgaard. Then you have the sorcerers, which are also interested in Ciri because, well, powerful magic and stuff, right? And I wouldn't be surprised if some of them would also want to experiment on her to find the source of the elder blood or find ways to benefit from that power in any conceivable way, right? Then you have the countries in the north, which are all interested in her for kind of the exact opposite reason that Emhyr wants her, right? Basically using her as a competitor for the throne of Sintra to basically deny that ground. Or they simply want to kill her because they fear her and her powers, and of course her political significance. Basically, if we can't get her, then nobody can. And then there was also the Wild Hunt that were after her because those psycho-elves on ghost horses wanted to use her powers to save their own homeland, breed the elder blood into their folk so they can conquer other worlds with that power. They were the by far most imminent threat to her because they noticed when she used her powers to teleport around and then just spawned in her proximity. That said, this problem got solved in The Witcher 3, and that is very important to know and understand. This threat doesn't exist anymore. Important for a later point. So now the point that I'm making is, there was always someone after Ciri, and that is, I guess, quite stressing, right? I mean, just imagine having hundreds of stalkers coming after you all the time that either want to kill, kidnap, or breed you. So her idea could be that the Trial of Grasses, the procedure which all witchers have to endure and that mutates their bodies and the DNA to make them physically more capable, that enhances their reflexes but makes them infertile as a consequence, that this could be the solution for all her problems, right? And because the elder blood lies in her genes, it could then alter her genes in a way that suppresses or even removes her elder blood, partially or completely. What then could also explain why she is not using her overpowered teleportation powers from Witcher 3 anymore in the trailer and is barely able to throw this electric fart into the face of the monster. There's just a few problems with that, right? One problem is the Elder Blood is really freaking sick, right? Ciri is basically a walking half-god within this universe and technically also in all the other universes that she can visit too by not just global but also inter-multiverse space travel, right? That stuff has its prophecies and is just established as a really big fucking thing within the world building, and it's really hard for me to imagine how they're gonna explain how this power gets even remotely affected by some worldly alchemy. But even more damning than this is the fact that Ciri already went through something like this in the books. When she ended up in the Brokilon Forest in the, I think, the second book, she drank the so-called Water of Brokilon, which is, and I quote the wiki, Water of Brokilon or Waters of Oblivion is a psychotropic mutagen containing substance which can turn human girls into dryads. So it is very similar to the trial of grasses that turns boys into witchers. So what a fact had this magic mutagenic water that not just turns young girls into dryads but additionally also has heavy effects on someone's memory as well, right? So it affects the brain. And for that, you know what, let me just quote the passages from the book itself, right? First, let me quote about Geralt's memories of someone that he saw before that drank the water in front of him, right? Quote, his gaze avoided Ciri, who placed her mouth at the rim of the chalice. He had seen it already, before. An identical scene. The convulsions, the hiccups, a terrible cry, unheard, which was extinguished at last, little by little. Then the void, the torpor, and apathy in the eyes that opened slowly. He had seen it all. And now we look at the effect that this water had on Ciri. Quote, the Witcher's head turned incredulously. Ciri breathed more rapidly. Her cheeks took on color, but nothing more. Nothing. Ciri blushed from it. That's it. And now you're gonna tell me that the Trial of Grasses is somehow so much more stronger than the Water of Brokilon that this suddenly has an effect on her that could overwrite her half-god magic powers. I don't think so, right? So all that already feels like a really big stretch, but it is by far not the main issue. It is by far not. It is one of the main issues, right? But there is more. Another issue is that the Trial of Grasses was exclusively done by Witcher schools with the help of sorcerers that both do not exist anymore. All known Witcher schools are basically abandoned and they don't have the means anymore to do the trials anyway, because there are no sorcerers that would know how to do it, besides maybe Jennifer, which has figured this out in Witcher 3 in a matter of like a few days or weeks, when they tried to retransform this ugly Uma thing into the elf Avalak again, which was a friend from Ciri, which they needed to find her, right? But the thing is, after they somehow succeeded in this procedure, nobody wanted to do this ever again afterwards, and nobody would support her in this endeavor. Not Daddy Geralt would support her, not Mommy Jennifer, or Sister Triss, or her big Witcher brothers Lambert and Eskel. Not just because it is painful as frick, but especially because the best survivor rates that we know of the Trial of Grasses are 3 out of 10. When this procedure was done with the young boys that lived and trained for years at a Witcher school, with a diet that included herbs and mushrooms to enhance their physique and create some amount of poison resistance that way, under the eyes of experienced sorcerers and witchers. And that after hundreds of years of experimenting until they found out that these are the most beneficial circumstances for a person to be in to not kick the bucket when they go through this trial. To make it very short, Ciri is too old. She is a woman. She never went through years of strict Witcher training or a diet like this. The 1 year that Ciri was at Kaer Morhen and got some Witcher training was mostly because the idiot brothers of the Wolf School, including Vesemir and Geralt, just didn't know what else they should entertain a child with. And it is simply not enough to get her into the state to survive this procedure, especially not several years afterwards. And as I said before, if anything, I would expect her elder blood to just reject the changes in the first place, or make the procedure even more painful and physically straining for her, reducing the chances of survival even more. Again, 3 out of 10. And with all that in mind, I think that is where the new Witcher school comes into play, where she's going to find all these necessary things. The problem is, we're talking about a Witcher school that didn't exist till now and was never mentioned before, right? The Link's Witcher school. That's why we had like this new medallion as a teaser like years ago. We're talking about a Witcher school that just didn't exist before, it was never mentioned before, a Witcher school that somehow still has experienced mages around, that neither the Lodge or any other mage knew about, a school that still practices the trial in secret, that is not noticed by any country or organization in the world, right? Not even like the special forces or spy organizations of each country, and where they still create witchers that nobody has ever heard of or that we ever stumbled upon in any previous media piece. That is the amount of bullshit they have to come up with to make this even to make this even possible, right? Not even tolerable, but just possible in the first place. And the thing is, even if we now just swallow all that shit, right, we still have to assume that Ciri as an adult is still arrogant, desperate, or stupid enough that she will take that very much unknown but very likely incredibly low chance of survival over any other option that she has after the main danger of the Wild Hunt is defeated in Witcher 3.
Certainty of death, small chance of success. What are we waiting for?
And the decision to do it would, in my opinion, destroy quite a lot of character development for Ciri. Because we need to keep in mind, right, especially as a solo world-roaming witcher, she would get so much more out of keeping and maybe even honing her magical abilities than from being a witcher. I mean, we all know what Ciri's Ma, Pavetta, was capable of, right? Just by having an emotional breakdown in Sintra's throne room, where she almost killed every single person that attended at this, like, what was it, a party? Including Geralt, the Queen, and herself, just by having an emotional breakdown. And we all know how often women have an emotion. And on top of that, after Witcher 3, she can now jump around as much as she wants and flee from any pursuer, without constantly having to worry about the Wild Hunt spawning in her back. So even if Ciri were to just keep her Witcher 3 powers and being able to teleport around as much as she wants, it would be so much more useful to her in a fight or by escaping pursuers than Cat Eyes. And especially if she undergoes the sorcerer training, she might even get infertile doing that as well, like Jennifer and Triss, right? What makes her then way less desirable for any position of power in, for example, Nilfgaard, right? Like others might still want to experiment on her, but I doubt that would change if she were a witcher either, because she would still be the child of destiny, the elder blood, and the only person that has this elder blood, even if it might be weakened or suppressed, right? I don't think that sorcerers would be less interested in her if she were a witcher now. She would still have that blood, technically. So these are basically the main big issues that this trailer has brought to light, that I see with the writing and the world building of this game, and where I'm very skeptical how they will even try to explain it, that Witcher-Ciri is a thing. That Witcher-Ciri without magical powers is a thing. Or without meaningful magical powers. Why she decides the way that she does, where she is going to get the powers, or like the Trial of Grasses, who's going to help her. It just feels not very well thought out. And now I want to talk about CD Projekt Red as a company. Because whenever I see people discuss CD Projekt Red as a company, I somehow often get the feeling that many block out the fact that Cyberpunk happened and that players never got a substantial apology or any benefits out of that situation. And somehow people still pretend that Cyberpunk is somehow a redemption story, that they finally after 3 goddamn years got a product that was advertised to them pre-release, that it just took them 3 years to finally deliver that game. I mean, players that got no little free DLCs like they, for example, did got for Witcher 3, even if that game did not had a massive release like Cyberpunk. Nobody that held the game after the release, despite of its issues, got like a discount for the add-on, like there's no loyalty bonus for anything, and I don't know, it is simply not a No Man's Sky story, right? No Man's Sky is so far away in terms of redemption story than Cyberpunk and CDPR. And I think, in fact, they are not sorry for what they did, but I expect them to be just more careful with their PR this time around. So they can now hype the game up, but they will keep the things as vague as possible so that nobody can tell them that they promised more than they would deliver at release. CDPR is not the developer anymore that put all the money they made from 2 quite niche AA games into one big project, which success completely blew their minds. CDPR now consists of multiple studios working on different titles akin to every other big developer that we know. They have shareholders that influence their decisions, and many of the old staff members do not work there anymore. This company is not a company anymore that deserves the blind trust of players. This company is not a post-Witcher 3 CD Projekt Red, but it is a post-Cyberpunk CD Projekt Red. And what that means further, we're gonna look into now real quick. Because along of the release of the trailer, CD Projekt Red gave a few interviews that in my opinion should set our expectations for the game quite well. Let's first look at the interview made with some important big boys from CDPR in IGN, where these people made some interesting statements. First and foremost, do we still remember the canon issue that I've talked about, right? And the fact that there is simply no established canon due to all the decisions that we made in the past games? Now let's read a claim from them. Quote, "And so regardless of the events you personally witnessed at the end of your own Witcher 3 playthrough, the sequel will not, quote, break any canon or even offend any canon." Different to my theory that I think they would just draw a line and establish one clear canon and just ignore all the other endings, it seems to be that they try to imply that they will somehow go more with a origin story type of approach. Because if they say they will not break any canon or offend any canon, then they are talking about multiple canons in some way. And I don't know, you can technically not break a canon that does not exist in the previous games due to all these decisions. And it was never really established in the first place. So, from my personal point of view, reading that, I just call that one bullshit, right? This is like some "we will not defile the previous trilogy" type of PR speak. But PR speak that just does not make sense, right? They are talking about a canon that does not exist at this point, right? Maybe one day after I release this video, they will tell everyone what the actual canon is of the game, but I do not see this happening right now. Another part that made me quite worry in this interview is, and I quote again, "Of course there will be plenty of players coming to The Witcher 4 who have no knowledge of the events of the previous games, to whom the details of Ciri's former adventures will mean little. CD Projekt Red is very aware that it's been a decade since the release of Wild Hunt, and that a whole generation of fantasy fans who were too young for a mature-rated RPG back in 2015 will likely start their Witcher journey with the 4th game when it finally launches. Quote, we want to aim for the new players, says Malgorzata Mitrega, the executive producer of The Witcher 4. The wider audience and also the people that know the franchise but who maybe do not play our games. As such, The Witcher 4 is being pitched as the start of something new, as much as it is the continuation of something old. And oh my, I cannot wait for a game that is consciously not made for the existing audience and tries to cater to a wider audience and to people that do not play their games. Where you have to ask yourself if they do not play their games now. Games that are very much still very playable, that have not aged incredibly terrible. I know many people will disagree in terms of Witcher 1 at least. If they do not play the games, at least not Witcher 3, right? Then why would they play another game that is meant to be the continuation of these games? That is literally called Witcher 4. There's the question, right? And the last time I witnessed an approach like this to a game's series, right, to a franchise, the game ended up with a price tag of $3 not even a year after release. And everybody can write a comment which game I might mean with that. And that, I think, is also a good moment to shortly talk about the other rumor that went around for the next Witcher game. Because besides the Ciri will be next rumor, what I always thought was quite silly for the mentioned reasons in this video, and that Witcher 3 was obviously an ending for all the characters we knew and not just Geralt, and generally for the story of the games and the books, we had also another rumor that talked about a game, as the next Witcher game, that would play way earlier in time, when the Witcher schools were just established, after monsters and magic just came into the world with the conjunction of fears, and where we would be able to create our own Witcher to explore this world. You know, basically in a time when the Witchers were heavily sought after, the world was overrun with monsters and magic, and the elves just kind of started to get fought off their lands and out of their beautiful cities. Many major events for the world and the story of The Witcher. And no matter how I look at it, but if catering to a new audience was the goal with this new game, catering to a new audience that did not play the previous games, which would be quite integral for any story that has Ciri as a protagonist, the idea of having a self-made Witcher roam a world that we have never seen before and with a completely new story, where we maybe meet Vesemir somewhere along the way, that sounds so much more feasible and pragmatic for this stated goal than whatever they now actually intend to do with The Witcher 4. And I do not understand why they decided the way that they did. And I think that is kind of worrying as well, just from a thought perspective, right? What is the vision? What is the concept of the game if it misses the stated goal by such a large margin? And that is where we have to look at the people that are making this game. And we have to look at one specific person here, right? And that is the franchise and lore designer and participant of one of the IGN reviews, Cian Mayer. Because this dude is a walking red flag for any development studio. He is literally in a position where he has significant power over the game's world building and the franchise as a whole, but then you see him tweet about wanting to punch gamers. He is defending unpopular changes made to beloved universes and franchises like the Black Aragorn from Magic the Gathering or the whole Rings of Power series. He was part of the hate train for Hogwarts Legacy. He is crying over people criticizing the injection of pronouns into games. He is defending diversity hiring, while he then is also pretending that everyone that is criticizing diversity hiring in turn only searches for excuses for being untalented themselves. What is weird and kind of ironic, right? But beyond all that, the one thing that should worry us by far the most about this dude and about the position that he is in is that he is also a defender for the Netflix Witcher series, and especially for the second season. It was pretty much hated by everyone and featured significant changes to the character's behavior and the book's story. And he defended the second season So much so that he even wrote an article about this, right? This means that this lad is very much open to defile another person's work and artistic vision for a world and the characters that it inhabited. This should be the biggest red flag for anyone to be very precautious of everything that comes out of this studio's PR department. And if they hired a person like this into one of the core roles to oversee the plot and world building of this game, what does this tell us about people in other important positions in this studio? I can neither expect the artistic and creative integrity from a person like this to faithfully continue a saga like The Witcher, nor do I expect them to have the necessary skill set to somehow deal with all the problems for the writing that I have stated in this video. In the end, Witcher 4's concept phase happened in the past few years, with the announcement of going just into full production just a few weeks ago. Those were the years that resulted in hiring for people that created masterpieces like Concord or Unknown Nine Awakening in other studios. People that defiled franchises with games like Suicide Squad, Dragon Age the Valguard, Diablo 4 or Saints Row 2022. We saw Witcher 4's trailer alongside a masterpiece like the Intergalactic trailer, showing us just the next upcoming game with a super smug, confident male woman as a protagonist. What? Did someone say Forspoken? No? See, my mind is just playing tricks on me again. Damn pattern recognition. But for real, all that is coming out of the same industry that CD Projekt Red is a part of for many, many years now. And in the end, it is just your environment that shapes you. That goes for humans as well for companies. And I don't know if I like that the indie studio founded by ex-Witcher veterans and led by one of The Witcher 3's game directors is called Rebel Wolves. Like, come on, it can't be more obvious that something very concerning ended up happening in this company after Witcher 3 was done. And then, and that might be a more controversial part of this video, we also need to keep in mind that the writers at CDPR are also not that great either most of the time, right? We can praise the Bloody Baron quest over and over and over again over the years, but the thing is, Witcher 3 by far did not only had Bloody Baron level writing in it, right? The game was littered with mediocre writing, left and right, and sometimes even allowed itself absolute dogshit moments, like the weird ending for the Pest Tower quest with Kira Metz, where her behavior was kind of weird, barely made really much sense, and then the dialogue options that we had as Geralt, and the consequences out of them, were misleading at best. Or another example, let me just throw the ending of the political assassination questline in here, where they fumbled the ending for Dijkstra to such a degree that you had to ask yourself if the title of the questline was referring to the killing of King Radovid, or by how much they jumped the shark and assassinated the character of Dijkstra for no apparent reason, except maybe that they didn't have enough time to finish the game properly. What, by the way, was also a reason why the main story had quite a lacking ending for the whole White Frost thing, but that is another topic, right? The thing is, yes, CDPR in general has a long history with not so quite finished games, and there's not a single game that you can call an exception. The others were simply not on the level of a Cyberpunk release, or the games are simply so old that you never saw or played the non-enhanced editions of them. On top of that, even Cyberpunk's writing was not a masterpiece by any means. The game lacks a proper introduction into the world and literally skips the part where our character makes themselves a name in the city, which you would think would be quite important, no? And instead of that, we got a few seconds long, lazy-ass cutscene and a time jump. The game simply feels like a second, if not even a third game of the trilogy, and features a story that feels like Johnny Silverhand's character got mid-development ham-fisted into something that was originally meant to play out completely differently, and where half of the things that we have to do to keep the story moving forward are completely brain-dead, just because whoever had to write the main story either lacked the talent or, again, the necessary time to come up with something better. I cannot speak for the add-on. I heard many good things about it, but I just haven't played it. But all that is worrying from my perspective, considering that the challenges for the writers that I've pointed out in this video are huge. Now what is left for me to say is that I'm currently looking forward to the Witcher 1 remake, because that game might be the best chance for us to get a first glimpse on what Witcher 4 could look like from a modern day CD Projekt Red, and how open they are to make drastic changes to their own games and IPs. And now, I get it. You, dear viewer, you might disagree with me. You might be super hyped for this game. You might disagree with everything I've told you so far, but as it stands right now, I personally simply do not have any hope for Witcher 4's story or its orientation towards an audience that doesn't exist, overlooked by people that despise their customers and are open to defile the world and characters they are working on, manufactured by a company that walks in the same shoes today as every other big gaming company as well, and show their players that they do not have the player-friendly ethics anymore that they were known for just 10 years ago, even in the face of a major fuck-up that we have probably never seen before, like the Cyberpunk release. Well, there's Concord, right? But different story. I don't doubt that the game will be more than solid on the gameplay front. I do not doubt that. I think they have talented enough people in this company to make the game fun on the gameplay side. But in terms of its writing and especially honoring its heritage and the past trilogy and probably also the books, I just have very serious doubts. And I hope that it became at least understandable why I think that way. And that's all I wanted to say in this video. Now, because that is the first video about writing on this channel, please tell me if you liked it, maybe what you would like to see me to improve in the next video, and if you want to hear me ramble about Diablo 4's writing next, which is a disgrace to Blizzard's universe as well, and for what the game could have been. Now I can only ask you to do the typical YouTube stuff, you know, pull the pinky, superscribe and ring the balls. If you want to see more from me in general, you can check out my second channel, my clips and talk channel, if you will. And besides that, I can just wish you a wonderful day. Until next time, see ya.